Yeah, at the X Academy, we're talking about themes, different themes that can battle in our heads. We're calling it politics of the mind. And it's this idea of that sometimes there's two sides in our head of certain things we believe, of certain themes and ideas and thoughts that we have in regards to things about Christianity, things about our character, and some of those things. And we know there can be a back and forth in our head. So we kind of want to dig into that debate or dig into that friction of the two sides in this Politics of the Mind series. And today, we're going to be looking at the politics of the mind in regards to pride versus humility. And that's something we're going to look at. And I want to start off by saying humility is something that doesn't make sense in our world. That humility calls us to be courteous, respectful, and patient in a world that is shrill, disrespectful, and intolerant. I think it's why humility goes against the grain so much, is because our world says that you are special, we're coddled, we are completely in this place of where no matter where we go or what we do, we're told we're special, we're told we're important, we're told we can do anything. There's a lot of positive things that are brought into our influence, words and people and situations that call us to greatness. Nothing wrong with that. I love greatness. Even Jesus says greater things you will do is you're finding your own greatness. Jesus was in the presence of, the disciples were in the presence of Jesus. Well, they were with Christ. They saw greatness in them. They saw greatness being with Jesus, where they even went to the point and said, can we sit on your left side and your right side? Because we think that we can do anything when we're with you. So it's not about the greatness that we're looking at, but it's really about pride, and that's versus the humility and the politics that go with that, or the back and forth that goes along with that. So I put this over here. Humility is placing a value on people over perceptions, responsibility over immaturity, and personal dignity over drive. It's understanding that you don't need the attention, that it's all about putting others first. It's about believing and becoming bigger and better for those people. It's about taking your moment and saying, it's living the enjoyment of life that comes when you see that other people around you are flourishing. That's what a true sense of humility should be found in, and you can see that and experience that. True humility means looking out for the interests of the collective good, you could say. True humility can seem to be looking at people and wanting their own gain over your own personal gain. Humility is considering others better than yourself and considering others to be bigger than yourself. There's this desire of humility that says, I'm going to celebrate people, I'm going to love people, I'm going to deny myself for people. I want them to be bigger and better and stronger. I want them to be able to be successful and be able to find themselves in a place where they're just saying, where they're flourishing, where they're loving life, where they're walking into the callings and the future and the things that they had. That's something that humility celebrates. That's something that humility loves. And when we look at that, we say, well, humility is something that we want to look at and really say, it's hard. Can we do that? It's hard to be that sometimes when in a world and a culture that's celebrating a different context and goes against the grain. I want to read this. Humility is not denying your strengths, but embracing your weaknesses. It's discovering there are great parts of you along with your flaws. Humility is not thinking less of me, but thinking more about God. And that's what we want to look at with humility. We're trying to break down and we're trying to understand and we're trying to really unpack, well, what can humility look like while we're contrasting that with pride? I think humility puts us in a position where we say, well, there's a confidence in God. That's at the end of the day, that's what we're saying. We're saying humility is putting confidence not in myself, but humility is putting confidence in God. It's giving God credit. It's giving God the credit to all your successes. It's owning your failures and realizing that when I'm connecting all my blessings back to God, and when I am celebrating all my successes because of God, that's when things come into a place where you can look at your life and you can say, I love, there's nothing more empowering and more secure in me, that when I am seeing everything I have comes from God, I can't do it without God, that's such a strength. That's already the starting point of humility. And from there, you begin to look at people and God very differently. You begin to look at your situations differently. You begin to see others differently because you're anchoring yourself in God first. Humility is actually security. It's saying you don't have to be the loudest or the brightest or the biggest in the room. Insecurity, put this down. Insecurity says, I have to impress you. Humility says, I get to improve you. Again, humility and security are two things that work hand in hand together. I'll read it again. Insecurity says, I have to impress you, but humility says, I get to improve you. So make your life less about the appearances to others and make it about the advancement of others. It's less about your appearance and how you come across and more about advancement with others. You know, pride, as we're contrasting humility and pride in this session, I remember the first time I flew, and I feel like sometimes pride is kind of like this. The first time you fly, you're in the spot where you get on the plane and you get your ticket and you go back to your seat, and sometimes you get the window seat. I love the aisle because I can kind of stick my arm out and other stuff, but then you get stuck in that middle seat. And that's probably the most humble place you can be on a plane, middle seat, back by the toilet. And when you get in that middle seat, you're just, you sit down and all of a sudden all three of you in there and you're each looking at your armrest and you're like, I need me some of that armrest, and you're just like pushing your way in. You're just like, all right, securing my territory. Let me get some of that armrest. I'm putting in, I'm trying to find, are you cool? Are we good? We got enough room? We're figuring it out. We're navigating armrest world. And as you settle in and you can enjoy the flight, and then as you watch the airline flight attendants, they're doing their thing, and then you look and you see that first class section, and you're like, oh, what a joy that would be to be in first class. I don't do first class. I'm typically back in coach, obviously, but I'm looking at the first class, and I'm just like, oh, it looks so great. In the first class, flight attendants are nice. They look at you, and they smile at you, and they look at you, and then they take that curtain when you get up in the flight, and they go, and they close it, almost like, oh, you're a nice person, but you don't belong here. You shall not pass. So, but you go from there, and all of a sudden, there came that moment, I went from there, and then went through my flight routines, did a lot of flights, I get my first class ticket. Then I get my first class ticket. And I remember I get up there, and I begin to get past the curtain. It's like I'm Willy Wonka. I'm Charlie getting my golden ticket to go into the Willy Wonka factory. I mean, it's just like, it is absolute heaven. I get warm cookies, I'm getting steak, I'm getting warm face towels, they're feeding me grapes. If they don't, I'm asking them to feed me grapes because it's so awesome. And it's great. I just remember sitting in that place and I was like, this is incredible. And then even when they went to go close the curtain, I said, oh, let me have the honors. I got this, let me do this. And I remember I went up, gave my smile, and closed the first class curtain because I felt so good. Pride affects you. Pride has an effect on you. It can affect your behavior. It can affect your actions. It can affect your demeanor. And you can see that prideful people want to be noticed, but humble people, they notice the need. And humility chooses not to look down upon others, but humility chooses to love others and not miss what's looking up and seeing what God's doing above you, because you're always in a place of submission. You're always in a place of wanting to serve and to bless. You're always, and you're in that place of submission. That's what's beautiful about submission. It's submission. It's being under the mission, that there's a mission that God's called you to do and to be, and you are living under that mission. You are under that. You're saying, it's not about me, about my mission, about my vision and everything. I'm living and giving and serving under the mission that God's called me to be. And so submission is a clear, crystal part of being able to live in a place of humility and being able to resist pride. God says this about pride. It says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble, James 4:6. That there is a sense in that says when God resists, that God looks at pride and God will resist pride above all measure. So when you're a prideful person, you're actually stopping the work of God. You're stopping the movement of God. You're stopping the God being poured out in your life in a way where grace is found in when you're humble. And grace is the favor of God that you can't earn. It's the embrace of God you don't have to try for. And so when you choose to practice humility, grace enters your life. Grace enters your ministry. Grace enters your family. Grace enters everything. And that grace or favor ends up promoting you. It ends up blessing you. It ends up diffusing arguments. It ends up preserving relationships. It ends up compelling you to forgive. It gives you a perspective of God to understand and to work and to flow. And so I love that when you see a lack of grace in your life, you're going to see an increase of pride. And when you see a decrease of pride, and when you start practicing humility, you just see grace. It becomes easier to work. Grace makes things smooth. Humility and grace go hand in hand. I remember I was out in I love slip and slides. I'm a fan of slip and slides. Grew up slip and slides. I love it. Get it wet. It's summertime. Roll it out. Put water on it. Let's go. And what I love about slip and slide is when you get back and you choose to run and then you hit that slide, it just kind of slides and you just get the glide. And I love that it's just, you just enjoy the summer of gliding towards the grass and just having a blast, right? But I think a lot of times when we lack grace in our life and when pride comes in, it's almost like you're getting ready to run on that slip and slide. And when you go in and you hit that yellow tarp, it's like grace is the water and there's no water on it. And you simply screech, you go like, grr. You just get it and you just come to almost like a halt right on. You're only going a few inches because there's no water, there's no glide, and you get up and it's like your chest is red, you got like bleeding, you know, it's nuts because there's no, it doesn't give you the forward motion. And I think that's the beauty about grace is it gives you the glide. It gives you a glide to life that's easier, and it's a lot less. It's just a lot less difficult to be able to navigate your relationships in your life and your career and all that when you have grace. And grace and humility go hand in hand. The more prideful you are, the more resistance you're going to get. The difficulties are going to happen. Relationships will be harder. We talked about all that. But when you get grace, it just glides. It just gets easy and easy. I want to take a couple thoughts now to throw your way in regards to with humility and pride. I put this down. You can compare yourself to others' successes, or you can contribute to others' successes. Humble leaders want others to shine. They get excited about their growth. They see themselves. They don't compare themselves to others, and they want to always be contributors. You're not sizing each other's ministries up. You're looking at each other and you're understanding and saying, "Good for you." You're saying, "Good for you. I'm excited about what your successes are. I'm celebrating what you're doing. I am excited about the future that you have with your ministry. That was a great win for you." These are all things that are marks of a humble person. And there really is a gut check in that to say, I'll put this down, here's a question. If a successful leader fails, are you broken over their loss? Do you sit there and say, well, they deserve that, you know? If an organization crumbles, do you think, well, I knew it wouldn't last? Or do you pray for the people involved? Do you pray for the leader involved? If a successful leader becomes more influential than you, do you sit there and look at them and say, well, their success is all about them? Or do you say, God, use them to make a difference? There's a difference in how you view people when you are a humble person. You celebrate them. You foster collaboration. You work together. You do those things. So here's a question. If someone has spent time with you, are they better human beings and feel inspired and are they a more refined follower of Christ because they're with you? That's a question, because that's the mark of a humble person, is you're working with them, you're collaborating with them. Humble leaders see that they can't do it themselves. They call out the gifts in people. They aren't threatened by ideas. They're not, or someone else's talent, if they're more talented. That all comes out of collaboration, and that humble leaders are just very, very content and want to contribute and help you. Here's another thought. You're not that big of a deal even when others might say you are. A humble leader versus a prideful leader doesn't allow that to get to his head. I read recently a story about the Roman generals, and whenever the Roman generals would win, they would triumphantly have these processions into the cities they conquered. And so after they've conquered these cities, they would go in with this procession, and they would see, and people would be, chanting them, and all of their, and the people would be celebrating them. If they went back even into their own Roman provinces, they would be celebrated. There was this just parades with these Roman generals where they were celebrating their conquest. And these people would be recognizing them as strong generals and strong men. But one thing that they would do though is there would be one of the slaves in the Roman Empire, they would have a laurel wreath, and they would hold this laurel wreath over their head. They would hold it above their head, and the whole time while the procession is going on and while the general was being celebrated, there would be a set of words that this slave would whisper into the ear, the servant would whisper into the ear of the general. And it was this: hominem te memento, which means, remember you're only a man. That slave was commissioned to constantly tell him and whisper in his ear, you're just a man. Everyone's telling you you're a god. Everyone's telling you you're the greatest thing that's happened since sliced bread. Everyone's telling you you're awesome. The awesomeness of your moment is all around you. And I'm commissioned, I am appointed to tell you you're just a man, you're not a god. And I think as leaders it's like that humble voice. As leaders, we need that humble voice in our lives saying, you're not that big of a deal. You're doing great things, but we need people in our lives to keep us grounded, to keep us modest, and to keep us respectful. So that'd be another question. Who are the voices that are keeping you modest? Who are the voices that are grounding you? Who's holding the wreath over your head and telling you that you're just a man? Because we need those in our lives. We need those people in our lives. Thanks a lot, Acts Academy. Love that we're on this journey together. We'll be doing Politics of the Mind the next session. See you soon.